Hello, I'm Steve Purdy. I'm a resident of the town of Groton, up in the northeast corner, the part that we normally refer to as Old Mystic. I've been asked to introduce you to and acquaint you with a grassroots citizens group called MOSA, Mystic Oral School Advocates. This group of people is very concerned about an extremely large real estate development that's been proposed for the former oral school property. Nearly 1,000 apartments and a number of other mixed-use applications. You may be familiar with our sign here if you've gone through our area recently. This is produced by MOSA, and it looks rather draconian. It says restrict Mystic Oral School development. This does not mean that we are opposed to development. It means that we want a reasonable development that will harmonize with the community rather than dominating it. This is a picture of the oral school property in 1952 when it was kind of in its heyday. It has a very interesting history that goes back into the early 19th century. It was originally developed by the Whipple family out of Ledyard as a school to teach people who were deaf usually from birth how to speak, using some of the techniques that he used in lip reading. So in a sense, at that time, it was in competition with sign language, which was at that point still under development. It is a legitimate educational method. It's well documented, and you can research it very easily on the internet. The state assisted in this through most of the 19th century, and then finally in 1919, the state acquired the school and operated as a state facility for 60 years. In 2008, they shut it down, but continued to allow certain of the buildings and facilities to be leased out to private parties and also to the town for other uses. Finally, in 2011, they shut the property down completely in order to save about $400,000 in annual operating costs. Instead of doing what they should have done at that time, which was to seek to redevelop or somehow repurpose the property immediately, they let it sit for the next 10 years. So what we now have is what the state calls a brownfield, a set of deteriorated buildings with questionable environmental qualities on a beautiful piece of property that is now not a prime candidate for redevelopment. This is just this traffic map here I'll bring up later on when we look at what the traffic flows will be out of this property, but this is just to kind of orient you to where this property is. So where the star is roughly the plateau, 160 feet above sea level. The river, of course, is at about sea level. So this is located in a place 160 feet up, which is accessed by a set of very steep rural roads that only allow about a half mile to cover that elevation. What that means is this is dependent on motor vehicles for access. You're not going to bicycle and walk up and down the precipitous approaches to this property. It is right in the middle of things traffic-wise. You can see it's pretty much located at exit 89, not far from exit 90, and in one way or another it has access to most of the routes that would be used for commuting out of this particular property. What is Mystic Oral School Advocates? It's a group of concerned citizens. It's a relatively informal organization. We work on kind of a consensus basis. And what we are advocating, and that is why the word advocates is in this title, is responsible and reasonable development of the Mystic Oral School MEC site. MEC is Mystic Educational Center. That's what the state calls the property, but traditionally it's always been the Mystic Oral School. And being that it's located on Oral School Road rather than Meck Street, we continue to call it the Mystic Oral School. So our goals are to responsibly develop this site. We would like to see a project that fits the site under current zoning regulations, and that our town will be capable of actively managing the potential effects of that development. Right now we have a situation with a questionable developer, which we'll talk about more in a few minutes. And we have questionable arrangements with that developer in between the state and the town. If necessary, we would like to see the whole thing make a new start. One of the accusations you get when you have a group like this from people that don't live in the immediate area, that this is a NIMBY or a not in my backyard movement. Certainly our members are concerned, as you would be if it was in your backyard, about its impact on your life and your future. This involves everything that you can imagine of how such a large development could impact your neighborhood and life. And our feeling is that particularly where it's located, it will affect you too. There will be impacts from this physically for a radius of 5 to 6 miles. There are logistical and financial concerns for the community. So our concerns are much broader than just where we live. And in fact, where we're located in the northeast corner, this will actually spill over and affect the communities of both Ledyard and Stonington. Around 2014, 2015, the town began to become interested in developing this property. And they commissioned a redevelopment study that rated 7 possible uses for the site in terms of their suitability. And then they issued a request for proposals for development. One of the important things is to understand about this property is that because of its location and its condition at this point, it is not a prime prospect for redevelopment. So we'll look at what these consulting studies came up with. One thing to note is that every one of these studies in every category states that the site should not be developed for a high traffic volume application because of its remoteness and inaccessibility. Okay, there were 7 possible uses that were considered by this particular consultant. 3 of those were rated moderate in terms of their potential success. None were rated excellent or prime. So there were 3 that were rated moderate, and these are in descending order of preference. Senior housing. This was considered to be a good potential market. However, it also has strong competition. We've had particularly a couple of facilities that opened recently over in the Stonington area that are doing very well. And one of the advantages of those is they're located very closely to really good roads. This particular location is isolated. The assessment of this that it would be the best possible use for this under the current conditions. Number 2 was market rate housing, which is what the development that's been proposed is talking about. The pros were that they thought they could get high rents because there would be access to employment, and that it would be compatible with the adjacent uses in that it is residential, which is what the primary use of the surrounding properties is right now. The cons were that it is an isolated location. It's isolated from services. The nearest drugstores and supermarkets are 2 to 3 miles away. The largest big box stores are 6 miles away minimum. And also that there is low population growth projected for this area. We'll talk about that shortly. So the assessment on this, that it has moderate potential based on its possible amenities that could be put there, which might make it attractive, and ease of commuting. I think that we're going to demonstrate is that there will not be ease of commuting out of this particular site, at least the way it's planned to be developed now. The third possibility was recreation, tourism, or hospitality. That was advantageous in that there is a strong tourism market here, obviously, and that it's something of a unique setting. It's high, it's surrounded by open space areas, so it's very unique in its physical characteristics. The cons is that there are strong competition in the tourism market already in this area. We have hotels and motels that are going in and out of business from one season to another. That would be traffic inducing for the immediate surroundings, and it is not directly located in the tourist area. Anything that you would want to do in the tourist category would be at least 2 to 3 miles away from this property. So their assessment was that it had moderate potential based on the strong tourist market, but had definite disadvantages in terms of its traffic and access concerns. There were 4 low potential ones, which I'll just go through very quickly. As an office property, there were no pros. There's little demand for that particular use in this area. It would be traffic inducing and incompatible with the surrounding properties. Retail industrial, no pros. The primary cons were it has poor visibility. You wouldn't want to put a Walmart up there because it's too remote and you couldn't see it from where the traffic-bearing roads are. Also, that is an application that would be traffic inducing and incompatible with the surroundings. Institutional, that is to reuse this as maybe some sort of a medical or educational facility. It would be complementary with the private use of the property. It would be somewhat compatible with the neighborhood, but the cons are that there's little potential for the need for an institution in that particular area and little demand. Town recreation, this sounds great. Everybody says, boy, this would make a really terrific recreational area. We could rehab the buildings and use those. The cons there are the development and operating cost of doing this. We're going to talk a little bit about how much it's going to cost to rehabilitate this property shortly. So the town would be taking on the complete redevelopment and operating cost of this. It would be traffic inducing, it's isolated, and it would not produce any property taxes under that particular use. So the consultant considered that not to be a best or highest use of the property. So in 2018, after having done these consulting studies, the town publicized this and requested proposals. We understand there were a number of people that visited the property, but in the end, the property itself, as I said, is not prime. They received only 4 proposals. And these are there's not in any particular order except the 2 finalists are the last 2. Globe Developers proposed that they develop a New England International Prep School. So this is an institutional use. They want to develop a private boarding school, grades 9 through 12, which would be primarily oriented toward preparing international students to enter the American education, upper education market. They would have utilized all of the existing buildings, and any land that was not in the end used for the school, they would turn into local residential housing after the school was operational. One of the primary disadvantages to this is that it's questionable as to what it would generate in property tax. If it was organized as a 503c or some other kind of nonprofit organization, the tax revenue would be minimal. Second group, the Stackstone Group, which has done quite a bit of work up in the Norwich area, proposed something less than 100 residential units. They didn't want to deal with the state on the $1 brownfield deal, so they were willing to buy the land and buildings from the state for about almost $800,000. And they proposed to repurpose all of the existing buildings and do the property cleanup. And this is where it gets interesting. The cost estimate for them to do that was in the area of $25 million to clean up the property and to redo all of the existing buildings. They would then put in area for 10 small businesses as startups, a future 4-acre development toward condos and offices, and reopen the recreational facilities to the community and develop some public parks and other outdoor activities. The Groton Housing Authority also made a proposal in partnership with a private developer. They were proposing a little under 200 residential units, a mixed kind of residential properties, rentals, single-family homes, etc. They estimated that in the end this would produce about $700,000 a year in property tax revenue for the town. They had contemplated a recreation and sports center, which could be semi-public, a greenhouse area, and a green energy plan that would include a zero emissions energy model. The final one is Restler Homes. This one takes 2 pages. Restler is proposing initially 700 to 800 apartments, now 931. That's nearly 1,000 residents on less than 50 acres. These they're proposing would be multi-story, multi-family, high-end rental units going at least as high as 30 feet, and a number of parking garages that would be required to park the 12 to 1,500 cars that they feel would belong to the people that were in these units. And they were going to do a whole bunch of other things. Rehab the oil school building into a commercial space, rehab the Pratt building, which is where the swimming pool and the auditorium were, and make that available to the public. A number of other mixed-use efforts, office space, nursery and daycare, and convenience neighborhood commercial space for the occupants. And again, a second page, cafeteria and food service or a restaurant, gathering spaces, the possibility of a 50-room boutique hotel on top of all of the rest of this, renovate the indoor aquatic center, outside court games, and they estimated that in the long run, if this ever got fully developed, that there would eventually be a 3.8 million annual property tax revenue to the town. So that's the big attractive number. What happened next? Well, the 4 proposals were evaluated by a team of 10 evaluators. To me, a very strange mix here. Of course, it's a state property, but what they're trying to do is to turn this now brownfield undesirable property over to the town, essentially, without remediating it. So this means the town will pick up with the developer all of the ramifications of getting this property ready to build. So 4 from the state, 4 of our town professional staff, and 2 Groton Town Council members. The 10 evaluators voted on the 4 proposals and they ranked the Groton Town and Restler proposal as number 2 and number 1. Restler second, Groton number 1. Only 7 of the 10 people voted on the final decision, and most of those made no additional comments. We do not know who those people were. They were assigned numbers. We don't know who voted in what way. And also there are state restrictions that prohibited those people from discussing the way the discussions had gone. The 4 major criteria, which I find to be extremely general, were 20% of rating on the approach that the developer was going to take, 20% on qualifications and timeliness, which is pretty interesting given the developer they selected, the viability of the project 30%, and the benefit to the town 30%. So this was brought down to the final 2, the GHA and Restler. And during that final decision, they flipped, and GHA was voted second and Restler was voted number 1. And again, we don't know who was in favor of what, or who the remarks that were made about these proposals, who made what remarks. Then they decided on Restler, and apparently they did not do any due diligence in examining his background. It looks like they just read the proposals, looked at them based on their face value, and made their evaluations and their decision. So in 2019 and 2020, they signed a number of agreements on our behalf with the state and with the now selected or preferred developer, and we knew nothing about that. These documents can all be found on the MOSA website if you want to look at them. So where are we now? Well, the degree to which these documents are binding on us as the people is unknown. However, recently when someone asked a council member whether the project could still be canceled, that person answered that there could still be contractual issues. But we've been told repeatedly that nothing binding has yet happened. Well, we're not so sure about that, and I don't think anybody's very sure about it except the people that have signed these documents. The preferred developer, Mr. Jeffrey Restler, it's interesting to look at his proposal. The first 3 pages were all about what a great person he is. He has paid large fines and restitution for fraudulent activities in New York, amounts in excess of $700,000. These were basically as a result of a plea bargain, which got his penalties down from being a felony to being a misdemeanor. Our officials say that record doesn't affect the project, has nothing to do with it. He's also had additional litigation since then in both New York and Connecticut, had to go back to court in order to fully pay the restitutions that he agreed to in the original plea bargain. He also has a project in New York that is incomplete after 10 years, and he has 3 in Connecticut going smaller, only about 200 units, that are also incomplete in a similar time frame. Our project, of course, is very complex and could easily go on for 10 to 15 years. Suppose that it failed in the middle. We're talking a huge development here. What would happen then, and what would that cost us? How would that get resolved and cleaned up? That's a really big question given his record. So where were our officials, and where are we now, the public? Our officials, state and local, evaluated these proposals, which involved tens of millions of public dollars without due diligence. They did not check into the background of any of these people that made proposals. One of our development people said recently in public, we don't normally do background checks on proposals. Well, that may be fine if you're doing proposals for 1-year contracts for snow plowing or cutting the lawn or trimming trees or sweeping the streets. We're talking a multi-million-dollar project here that's going to devolve on us. This developer is already missing deadlines, and we don't even know whether he's really the developer. Some people in our town government say yes, some say maybe, some say not yet. We'd like to know how firmly we're committed and what we are committed to. We got a real problem here with the developer's experience and ours. Remember that in the evaluations, they were supposed to have been looking at the experience of the developer and their ability to complete projects. This particular outfit has never developed more than about 200 units. Everything that they have been done is purely residential and no mixed use. Mr. Repler's comment is, once you've built one house, you can build anything. Well, our town staff doesn't have that kind of experience either. They've never done anything of this size, and they've never done a mixed-use project. Restler has 3 incomplete residential projects in Connecticut now. He's involved in litigation on some of those, and none of these is near the size of the proposed project. Again, if you compare what they are just to the residential portion of the proposal, they're only at 17 to 15%. Neither the developer nor our town staff has managed a development of this size and type. Where is the market? The 2019 Department of Defense study, based on the supposed expansion at Electric Boat to complete the new sub-program, determined that there is already adequate housing available for new EB employees, which is expected to be a total number of 5,000 by 2029. Only 1/3 of those will come from outside southeastern Connecticut. The rest of them already live here. And 1/3 of the 600 added naval personnel may live off base. Most of the people that were asked said that they would consider any rent above $1,500 a month to be unaffordable. The Restler development is looking at $1,700 to possibly $3,000 a month plus utilities. So here we are, we're back to the map. Think about this now. The developer himself says there will be 1.3 to 1.5 cars per unit. That's 1,500 automobiles on this 50-acre site that's 160 feet above sea level, surrounded by steep slopes and exiting onto rural roads. So we have traffic in this area now. We know that the commuters that are going out now tend to go out to 184 and 117 to get to Groton and New London. If they're going the other way, 184 and 117, Route 27 to I-95, and to Route 1 into High Street. So look at this 1,400 cars as being sort of a waterfall of traffic during the rush hour. If only 1/3 of those, 300 to 400, try to get out of that property within a half an hour between 7 and 9, that is a solid mile of cars. How is that going to work? We know, I mean, I'm an experienced commuter. I've commuted a lot during my professional life, and I know that commuters are always looking for the easiest way out to get to where they need to go at a particular point in time. This group of people is going to disperse onto all of these other roadways trying to get to where they need to go. One of the principal issues, if you look at the X's on the diagram, the X at the top is one exit from Oral School Road to Cow Hill Road at Lamphere Road. There's a traffic light there now. At the bottom you see an X, which is the southern part of Oral School Road exiting also onto Cow Hill Road. The X with the question marks, the developer has acquired additional property and says that he's going to run a new road from the Oral School property down to Cow Hill Road. Well, it's still Cow Hill Road. He's also saying that because the southern part of Oral School Road is particularly difficult, he may not allow access from his property onto the southern route. So that says we're back to 2 exits and entrances. So we have a waterfall of cars coming out probably between 7 and 9, and then between 4 and 6 in the afternoon. It's like a funnel. They're all trying to get back in again to the same spot. The developer claims that if you do a traffic study, you should spread it over 24 hours. Well, that may be the case if you live near the New Jersey Turnpike. But here we know that most of that traffic is concentrated between probably 6 in the morning and 7 at night. It's not a 24-hour proposition. Okay, so there are going to be over 1,200 vehicles on site. And in addition to that, if he puts in all of the other uses that he's proposing, there will be hundreds of other vehicles daily for employees coming to work and leaving, and also for people accessing those other facilities. They all will be entering and exiting by Oral School Road and a new driveway, and they will all be using Cow Hill Road. Just remember that just 300 vehicles try to get in and out of there in a half hour, which is perfectly possible during the rush hour. Could be much more than that, is a line of vehicles over a mile long. More traffic signals will just break the lines into blocks, which will be creeping along and synced with the time signals. Close to home, down on the river, there's a place called River Road, which is a residential area and also a recreational area. But we also have to look at the other local streets here. This traffic is not going to disperse. It's not going to all go immediately to 95 if that's not convenient. Some will go down High Street to Route 1. Some will go west through the neighborhoods to Mystic Street to either I-95 or south to Route 1, and northwest to routes 184, 117, and Cow Hill Road and possibly Route 7 to Stonington. So large volume spillover is a big concern. Another issue is a scenic road, River Road, which is now basically a recreational area. There's no doubt that people will use that to get to the other ways out of the property, and it would be a shame to lose that recreational space to overwhelming commuter traffic. Broader traffic issues, here's where it really gets into your backyard. With the volume of traffic we're talking about here, this is going to affect everybody for a radius of 5 to 6 miles, including spillover into Ledyard and Stonington. Any emergency vehicles are going to have plans ahead on how they're going to get through this area or avoid it, and how are they going to directly service any call within several miles, particularly during the rush hours. Commuters from Ledyard and Groton now use Cow Hill Road and routes 184 and 117 to exit I-95, and they will now be competing for slots in the commuter Grand Prix. Route 27 and the surrounding roads will be used more heavily for access to 95 and to go around downtown Mystic. There also is an interesting political concern. This will be a transit community of 12 to 1,500 people who will qualify to be Connecticut and Groton voters. It could become politically powerful in any voting period by organized block voting. It's much easier to influence 300 to 400 people living together in a few large buildings than it is to get that number coordinated in the general public. This just doesn't seem politically healthy. Infrastructure and services, who's on first? Well, right now there's no plan. So there's no estimate of responsibility of who's going to pay for infrastructure upgrades and services among the developer, the town, the state, and the utilities. And there are many things that are going to have to be upgraded. We need a thorough and objective public advanced 30-year financial analysis evaluated by an outside auditor to determine what the true financial picture will be over the next 30 years. What plan? There isn't any plan. This is a catch-22. We've been told that the developer can't develop a plan until he knows the zoning. However, the real story is that the zoning people don't have to deal with this until the developer has a plan. So far, he is overdue on submitting a written notice of the subdivisions that his project will require. That is what the Planning and Zoning Commission would act on if they had it. It's overdue now, and it doesn't seem to be anywhere on the horizon. So far, there has been one public zoning workshop with our development people in which they have not voted because there was no zoning request made, but in which the general expression of the commission was they did not think that a project of this size and density should be done in this particular area, so they were unlikely to change the zoning to allow that. We need to be looking at possible exits from this project right now. The bottom line, it's just too big. This is about sheer volume of activity, not just formula-based zoning density. 931 units, that's almost 1,000. Plus or minus 50 difficult to access acres, 1,500 people, 12 to 1,300 vehicles, plus all of these other mixed use facilities that this developer plans. We don't know how or why commitments that affect our future have been made. We just haven't had a voice. We welcome reasonable development, but it should be something that will harmonize with our community, not destroy it, and we just don't see room there for another small city. So if you'd like to get in touch with us, here's our website, www.mysticoralschooladvocates.org. You can go there, you'll see many of the documents that I've talked about in order to get better information, and there's information there on how to join our group.